Shalom. First and foremost, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham Yahushai, Bahasham, Bracha Kodash. Double honors to the elders and the apostles of Great Millstone, and peace and blessings to the elect. And today we're going to go into the book of Hosea, the 10th chapter, as you'll see in the subheading, Retribution for Israel's Sin. So this is Hosea chapter 10, verse 1. And it reads, Israel is an empty vine. He bringeth forth fruit unto himself. According to the multitude of his fruit, he hath increased the altars. According to the goodness of his land, they have made goodly images. And really, it more accurately should read, rather than Israel is an empty vine, but rather, as it's worded in the NKJV, Israel empties his vine, right? So like a vine that bears, fruit. All right. Basically, it's a luscious, right? Or as the NLT uses, a luxuriant vine that bears fruit that then gets emptied here. Okay. In the metaphorical sense, right? So it says here, he bringeth forth fruit unto himself according to the multitude of his fruit. That's why, it makes more sense rather than empty as in like a vine that doesn't bear fruit, but more so one that bears, really good fruit, and then it's plucked off, right? But as it says here, according to the multitude of his fruit, he hath increased the altars. So what it's saying here is as they increased, okay, and as they, they gained and they grew, they also increased in wickedness. Okay, so as it says here, they increased the altars, and these were pagan altars, right? Altars by which they would serve and worship other gods upon and sacrifice to those gods. According to the goodness of his land, they have made goodly images. You see, and that's really what the heathens do as well, right? Like they as things go well for them, they attribute that to these different gods, right? And then they sacrifice to these gods, and so on and so forth. And we can see here Israel was going in that same way. So rather than bless the Lord and thank the Lord, they were actually increasing in idolatry and increasing in more wickedness. So these goodly images being idols. Their heart is divided. Now shall they be found faulty, right? Because they didn't have a heart, fully set after the Lord. Okay. Like when somebody says they want your undivided attention, they want you to be 100% focused on them. But here, their heart went astray from the Lord, and now they're going to be found with fault, right? They're going to be found guilty. He shall break down their altars. He shall spoil their images, right? That's the Most High, and he would do that by way of the destruction or the calamity that he would bring upon them. Okay. For now they shall say, we have no king, because we feared not the Lord. What then should a king do to us? Right. So, and that for now, meaning like when that time of destruction is staring them in the face, they're gonna say, when they say we have no king, it doesn't mean literally, right? Because the Northern Kingdom did have kings up until the point of being besieged, all right, and then taken captive. But by saying we have no king is in that they're gonna realize and acknowledge that the kings that they had set weren't, those worthy to actually play the role of, what a king should do in leading the people in the right way, right, to serve the Lord. And so because of that, as they said, because we feared not the Lord. And a couple of chapters back, it might have been even in this chapter, right, it mentions that they set up, see if I can find it. They set up kings without the Lord's. There we go. Hosea 8:4, right? They have set up kings, but not by me. They have made princes, and I knew it not. See, and so in that time of calamity, they're going to realize that those kings that they had over there, that they were so joyous to serve under, though those kings were leading them astray, because they feared not the Lord, they didn't do this in the proper way. right? As it says, what then should a king do to us? Meaning, when this time comes, like, that king they had wouldn't be able to do anything for them because he himself would either be destroyed or carried captive along with them. Verse 4, they have spoken words, swearing falsely in making a covenant, right? Because they made covenants in which they would not keep. And that's why it was likened to swearing falsely, because when they swear or they make that covenant, they inwardly are not going to keep it. So that's a false, oath or promise. Thus, judgment springeth up as hemlock in the furrows of the field. So thus, meaning like as a result or because of this, the Lord said he's going to have judgment spring up upon them, right, as hemlock in the furrows of the field. Now, this is dealing with like, farmland, right? And when you look up furrows, it's like a farm. It's like those little rows that they make in the field, right? Like that. As you can see right here, these are like furrows. And then you have like the bed where the actual, seed is planted and so on. So the furrows would allow water, as you can see here, to pass through, and so on, right? Like as it says here, irrigation. Now, hemlock is a poisonous plant. So imagine you have these furrows and hemlocks are growing through. That can contaminate that water. It can contaminate or mess up the seeds over there, right? If you look up here, hemlock, it's very well known, right? Hemlock plant. So as it says here, Conium maculatum, known as hemlock or poison hemlock, is a highly poisonous flowering plant in the carrot family, so on and so forth. So point is, it's a pretty to emphasize that the Lord is going to bring judgment upon him. And he's just using this like sort of analogy here. Verse 5, the inhabitants of Samaria shall fear because of the calves of Bethaven, for the people thereof shall mourn over it. Right, because the Lord is going to have it broken down, as he mentioned so many times, by Hosea. And the priests thereof that rejoiced on it. Because remember that they actually believed that these were their gods. They sacrificed unto them. So by witnessing that destruction, that it being broken down and taken away, right, to them that would be a shocking, realization of like the gods that they serve being basically messed up right before them. And that's why they were going to mourn over it, right, both the people and the priest. As it says, and the priest thereof that rejoiced on it, for the glory thereof, because it is departed from it. See, so they're going to mourn because the Lord is going to strip that glory away. The glory they attributed to it as what Jeroboam set up or set them up to believe, that these were the gods that delivered you up out of Egypt. The Lord is going to strip all that away, showing you that it's really just idle. It's just wood. It doesn't hold any power. It's not even alive. Verse 6, it shall be also carried to Assyria for a present to King Jareb. Now, this name Jareb has been mentioned, right? Hosea mentioned this a couple of times, though it's not clear which Assyrian king specifically it's referring to. At least, it's evident that it's referring to one of the Assyrian kings, which makes sense here, as it says, it shall be carried onto Assyria. Now, if you look in like any secular history and so on, there isn't any, for example, the Assyrians don't document that we took golden calves from Samaria, but you can imagine it being a part of the spoils, okay, that they ended up taking because these were golden calves, right? And so besieging this area, seeing those giant golden calves over there, of course, they would break it down and take it as a resource. So as the Lord mentioned, it's going to be carried to Assyria for a present to King Jareb. Ephraim shall receive shame, and Israel shall be ashamed of his own counsel. Yeah, because they're gonna see basically the folly in their ways when judgment comes upon them, and there's nothing they can do about it. Witnessing the idol that they believed so highly to be a god just get broken up and taken captive along with them. Verse 7, as for Samaria, her king is cut off as the foam upon the water. And when you look into this word foam here, it really just goes into like a twig, right? And so you can imagine, right, the king at the time, the ruler, whether being killed or being carried away captive with the people, would be weak, defenseless, right? Similar to how if you see a piece of stick, like a twig upon a body of water, it's really just laying on the surface, being carried whithersoever the currents take it. Verse 8, and that would be sort of the state of the king, of the ruler. The high places also of Aven, the sin of Israel. Now this Aven here, obviously is some location over there in Israel. Now it could have been a suffix, right, or a short name of Bethaven, because as it mentions, that's where the calves were. But as it mentions here, Aven being a place over there in Israel is referred to as the sin of Israel. So this had to be one of those high places where they, once again, either the same as Bethaven, where they worship those golden calves, or some other location in Israel where they did something similar there. So as it's referred to as the sin of Israel shall be destroyed, right? So if there were altars up there, it would be broken down, and basically when you read about countries or nations taking over another nation via a siege, there's typically a lot of destruction, which includes burning of buildings, burning of cities, destroying of structures, and all of those things. Remember, it's war. So as it reads, the thorn and the thistle shall come up upon their altars, which is to signify that, having their city broken down, right, and them being removed out of the land, pretty much these altars wouldn't have anybody to sacrifice at them, being left there and abandoned to the point where they're going to grow thorns and thistles. So in other words, the Lord said, I'm going to put a stop to this idolatry over here. And they shall say to the mountains, cover us, and to the hills, fall upon us, or fall on us. And this is not literal, right? They're not going to stand there and look at the mountains and say, hey, cover us. But it's in other words, what it's saying is they would try to flee, right, to the mountains for safety, to hide in the caves, right, or to the hills, once again, to hide themselves from this wrath that was coming upon them. And similarly, right, in other precepts, I believe in Luke, also in Revelation, it uses the same verbiage to represent, these elites trying to hide themselves when the Lord comes back with judgment. Verse 9, O Israel, thou hast sinned from the days of Gibeah. There they stood. The battle in Gibeah against the children of iniquity did not overtake them. And let's actually look into this word overtake. But here we can see Hosea is making reference back to, right, to take hold, to secure, to have enough, back to an event that happened right here in Gibeah, going back to the book of Judges, right? If we do a cross-reference on here, you'll notice, or you'll see here, it refers back to Judges 19. And just a quick summary of this, in Judges 19, right, the story is of, I believe it was a Levite whose concubine ended up running away. Now, I forget exactly if she committed adultery and then fled back to her hometown. But long story short, the Levite went there, right? He traveled to go and get his concubine back. And after, talking to her and getting her back, on his way back to his where he dwelt, he had to go through the land of Benjamin, right? I believe where he ended up having to spend the night, being lodged or taken in by somebody over there in Gibeah. And as you can see in verse 22, right, while he was there with his concubine and the owner of the house, it says, now as they were making their hearts merry, behold, the men of the city, certain sons of Belial, right? So these were basically base men, demons, gremlins, good for nothing. As it says, they beset the house round about. So you know how Jake likes to gang up, group up, and just do mischief. These were likened unto those, right? So they surrounded the house and beat at the door and spake to the master of the house, that the old man, saying, bring forth the man that came into the house, that we may know him. So in other words, they wanted to commit heinous acts against that Levite. If I remember correctly, I believe it was a Levite that was brought into the house, okay, which is just straight wickedness. But what ended up happening was the Levite ended up, giving them his concubine instead, and they basically abused her, sexually all the night long until she died. And so that caused an outrage, okay, within Israel, to where pretty much the nation came against Benjamin, right, and went to war with him. So going back here to Hosea 10 and 9, right, Hosea makes reference, right, saying, thou hast sinned from the days of Gibeah. So he's making reference to that, and they understand, Israel would understand at that time that what happened at Gibeah, right, in the past. And as it says, there they stood, the battle in Gibeah against the children of iniquity. Now, when you actually read this in the NLT, I think is a bit clearer. It says here, the Lord says, O Israel, ever since Gibeah, there has been only sin and more sin. You have made no progress whatsoever. Was it not right that the wicked men of Gibeah were attacked? Right? Because that's pretty much, when you read the story, you can go back and read it in Judges. Interestingly enough, Benjamin actually held their own, pretty well in going against the rest of the tribes for this, wickedness that some of those individuals of that tribe had committed. But that's pretty much the reference that's being made over here, that, you guys are still committing wickedness since that time. Okay. And even when that, Israel went to war with Benjamin back then, right, for the wickedness that those Israelites did, you still haven't learned your lesson. So verse 10, it says, it is in my desire that I should chastise them. So the Lord said, I plan to bring chastisement upon them, and the people shall be gathered against them. The people here being the nations, or in particular the Assyrians. The Lord would gather them against Israel, when they shall bind themselves in their two furrows. And this is once again like a poetic / metaphorical speak. The furrows, as I showed before, are like these paths, right, made out in the ground. Okay, and so referring to them binding themselves in their furrows is kind of like being stuck in their own way, right? Stuck in their wicked ways. So imagine somebody being like tied up, laying out here in this furrow, like they're kind of stuck there, right? So as the Lord is saying here, basically, because they refuse to adhere to Him, right, and basically they've bound themselves in their their sinful ways, I'm going to chastise them, right? And I'm going to bring this nation up against them. Verse 11, and Ephraim is as an heifer that is taught, meaning a heifer being like a cow that is trained, and loveth to tread out the corn. So when you deal with like the ancient times, a part of, and let me actually pull it up here, cow treading corn on threshing floor. So as you can see here, this is what a threshing floor would look like, right? Right now it's covered with the sheaves and so on, but it would be a hard surface ground, and you would be able to train cows, right, or oxen, to be able to actually tread out the corn or the grain from the husk, okay, or from the sheaf, or from those things right there that you see, okay, on the ground. And as it's in the law, right, as the oxen or the cow would go around. So you can see here, right, they sort of have them yoked together, and then they have them basically anchored to this center, so they don't go off. They just keep going around in circles, stepping and stepping and stepping, using their hooves to break up the husk, right, and get the grain out. And then whoever it is that's over there would be able to actually get what they want. So this was one way of threshing. Now, what you can see in this image here is that they have muzzled, right? They've muzzled the ox or the cow. The law in the scriptures say you're not supposed to do that, right? You're not supposed to muzzle the ox, because the Lord had a law to where by them going ahead and doing this labor, they would be able to eat some of the corn or some of the grain or so on that would fall as they were going around threshing, right? That's in the law. So really, according to that image, right, Israel wasn't supposed to do that. So going back here to Hosea 10 and 11, right, he's like the Lord here, right, is likening Ephraim onto that heifer that has been trained to be able to tread out the corn, and it loves that role or that job because it's easier than having a yoke around your neck and having to drag a heavy ass plow, okay, and break up the earth. It's much easier to just tread on the corn and also be able to eat some than to do that. So that's why it says they love to do that, right? And this represents like them basically living the easy life, right? They're like a cow that's been trained to tread grain, and they love doing that. But as it says here, but I passed over her fair neck. And so now the Lord is going to emphasize here what he's going to do. It says, I will make Ephraim to ride. Ride here meaning to drag the plow. So now let's look at cow/oxen plowing. There you go. So this is an image here. This is an image here, right? These are some images here. So you would usually yoke. Okay, this one is not bad. So this is a plow, right? That's the plowman. That's the oxen. They would be yoked together, right? This is a yoke, and they would be yoked together, and they would have to pull, okay? And as they're pulling, the plowman would be pressing down and also steering, right? So that the plow breaks up the earth, as you can see like this, how they want it to be. And then they can, plant the seeds in and so on and so forth. So the Lord says, yeah, you were having fun, right? Treading the corn, eating it. But now I'm going to put a yoke upon your neck, and I will make Ephraim to ride, to basically, drag that plow, and Judah shall plow, right? So it's likened on to yoking Ephraim and Judah together and having to do this harder version of labor, right? And Jacob shall break his clods. And the clods here, breaking the clods is like breaking the earth, right here, right? So like two oxen are pulling, the plowman is steering, and also having the plow being pressed down to break up the earth so that they can then plant in there. So that's in essence the analogy. But why is the Lord saying this? He's basically saying that I'm going to put you into I'm going to make you subject to harsh labor, right? Onto bondage, onto captivity, onto servitude. All right, and this is just the example that's being used. And this is why it's important to understand, right, some of the customs of back then, right? Because during the time of Hosea, like when you read the writings of the prophets, you'll notice that different prophets, obviously in different timelines, more in the past, more in the future, right? During the time of the Romans or the Greeks, or going back to this time, a little prior to the Assyrians, the manners and customs of those times were different. So whether they're speaking about judgment or they're, making reference to some point, right, in terms of daily life, if you understand the daily life and the things that they would do, it's easier to get the reference and then better understand the point that's being made. So verse 12, it says, sow to yourselves in righteousness, reap in mercy, break up your fallow ground, for it is time to seek the Lord Yahweh. So rather than continuing in your wickedness, right, sow yourselves in righteousness, right? And this is metaphorical, right, to say seek the ways of the Lord. Okay, like it's like sowing good seed into the earth, right? Reap in mercy, and when you reap, That's when the seed that you've planted is grown, it's harvest time. Now you're using the sickle to cut and to reap. All right. So reap in mercy, break up your fallow ground, open up your mind and seek the ways of the Lord, right? For it is time to seek the Lord till he come and rain righteousness upon you. Okay. So seek the Lord, liken on to planting the righteous ways of the Lord in your mind. And in due time, he will rain righteousness upon you, so that as a result, what comes up out of the ground, right, what grows is going to be a fruitful and sort of like peaceful and righteous life for you. But, right, verse 13, ye have plowed wickedness, ye have reaped iniquity, ye have eaten the fruit of lies. So rather than seeking the ways of the Lord, you decided to, the actions that you took were in wickedness. Therefore, the consequences were, was that of iniquity. We read, I believe it was in the previous chapter, how it says they multiplied altars unto themselves, right? And therefore it became, their sin. And pretty much, right, the wicked actions they took by being disobedient ended up leading to them being entrenched in a way of sin and having to basically eat the fruit thereof. It says, because thou didst trust in thy way, in the multitude of thy mighty men. So you trusted in your way. You thought you knew what's better, right? You'd rather do what you want to do than to follow the words of the Lord. Verse 14, therefore shall a tumult arise among thy people. So the Lord is going to bring trouble, disturbance, and all thy fortresses shall be spoiled, as Shalman spoiled Beth Arbel, right, in the day of battle. Once again, now here Hosea is making a reference likely to something that happened, prior to this time. Okay, though there's not much other references to this, right? This might have been one of those, events that happened similar to how Amos references the earthquake, right? That happened, not much records on it, but this is something that during their time, they knew what he was referring to. All right, so he's saying here, right, your fortresses, your buildings, they're going to be broken down similar to during this time, right, when this individual named Shalman, whether that's a title or throne name or his actual name, spoiled Beth Arbel in the day of battle. The mother was dashed in pieces upon her children. So you can imagine it was probably a very violent, battle or takeover, as it says, merciless, right, which gives the visual of a mother being basically killed along with her children. So, right, in like manner shall Bethel do unto you because of your great wickedness. Now, Bethel is a place. But why is it saying that? Because the things that were done there are going to be the cause of Israel suffering this similar consequence, right? So shall Bethel do unto you because of your great wickedness. In a morning shall the king of Israel be utterly be cut off, right? So there's going to come a point in time, which now, as we keep going through these chapters, is getting much and much closer, right, to where that Assyrian king, I believe it was Shalmaneser V at that time, would come against Israel, and that would be pretty much the end of the kingdom of Israel, the northern kingdoms, reign in that land. Both them and their king would be taken right out captive to Assyria. So that brings us to the end of the book of Hosea, the 10th chapter. Lord willing, this was edifying to the elect. In closing, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham Yahweh Shai, Bahasham, Recha Kudash. And until next time, Shalom.